Hey there, welcome to Write On, the podcast from Final Draft. This is the show where we talk about all things screenwriting. I'm your host, Phil Galasso. On today's show, we have an interview with writer Moises Zamora, creator of Selena, the series on Netflix. Our guest host, screenwriting career coach Lee Jessup, chatted with Moises about his journey to become a writer, his focus on craft as his career developed, how he got the opportunity to work on Selena, and more. Check it out.
Hi, Moises.
Hi, Lee. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Been a good day today. Lots of writing, getting some notes back. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Love it. Well, you and I have known each other forever, and I've known Final Draft forever. So when they offered this opportunity for me to bring you on to the Write On podcast, I was ecstatic because all I want to do is just put the spotlight on you that you deserve. So I know you'll do a better job of it than me. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about you, kind of your mini bio?
Yeah, and thank you for that. Oh, that lovely. And I love working with you as well. And for those who don't know, Lee is a career coach and has been instrumental in my career, and especially in the early days when I was breaking in. Now, she's not just a friend, but also a person that I go to guide me in this, labyrinth of entertainment that it can, this industry is sometimes. So for me, I am celebrating that have Selena, the series, part 2 coming out. I'm the creator, co-showrunner, and executive producer of that show. Very proud. However, my beginnings were a little different. I started actually writing novels in Spanish, and one particular publication led to that sort of validation. After that, I jumped into advertising and marketing, but I've always wanted to continue being a storyteller, a writer. Writing is what I call my purpose, my calling, and being in LA, it just made sense to just try screenwriting, especially coming from writing novels. It felt like maybe TV writing was the best sort of way to segue into that. And really, that's how I met Lee. Going back to school at UCLA Extension, hearing one of her lectures, and just sort of working on that craft led me to all the things that have happened to me in the past few years in my career.
Well, thank you for all the kind things that you said about me, but let's keep this about you. You and I both have a tendency to like, no, let's talk about you. But this time, really, let's talk about you. So you decided that TV writing, screenwriting is the path to go. You started taking classes. You know me, I love telling writers what are these actual steps that writers have taken. So can you talk a little bit about the educational course that you took, the goals that you had, what you were developing as you were kind of setting up to emerge, all the way up to, if we can talk about Second Coming a little bit.
Absolutely. One of the things that I learned throughout, in my 20s when I published that novel is just all the work that goes into it. And additionally, that sometimes it's very difficult to switch into a solitary type of writing, which is, writing a book, into something that is collaborative, and that there are a lot of people that come into the process. There's like notes, executives, managers, agents, or rounds, and the process itself, it's very collaborative, TV and screenwriting. And so changing sort of that kind of mindset took me a minute, but I realized that if I wanted to really succeed in making that jump into screenwriting, is that I had to put my sort of insecurities, my ego aside, and just listen to people and learn from people, and take those notes and consider them, because they know better, at least that when I was starting out. So when I took enrolled in UCLA Extension School for screenwriting, and I knew that I just wanted to learn. That was my goal, to learn, to not be one of those screenwriters that don't dominate the format, because I know that's very specific. I didn't want to be in the first page, be a person that's doesn't know how to write a screenplay properly. And that, of course, led to you meeting Lee, and you actually were the one that advised me to take other workshops to keep working on that craft. And so I jumped from UCLA to script anatomy, which I also value those workshops very much. I still take, once in a while a script anatomy course just to sort of like remind myself of the basics and structure again and again. It's always good. I love taking classes. I still take classes in all sorts of ways. But and Second Coming was like a sort of an idea that it was high concept. It was a script that like I was sort of noodling in UCLA. I wrote a draft there, and then I felt that the version that I ended up with was as a result of also including script anatomy in that process. And after I think a couple of classes there, I ended up with the script that essentially led to getting my first manager, my first rep, and opening the door to meeting executives and production companies. And essentially, it is the script that got me my first job for John Riley on American Crime, and my second job. So I owe a lot to that script.
Having read it and having also see it through the evolution, it is a brilliant pilot. And I think that the setup for me, the first couple of pages, it's been like 6 years now since I've read it. Mm-hmm. The Jesuit monk who lost his faith. Mm-hmm. What a great character that you just want to follow into this amazing story that talks about the mythology of faith and belief and loss of belief. It was, and it was, for the record, it was initially written as a procedural, which just bringing that depth and heft into a procedural in such a unique way was so exciting. So, me, I read a ton. It's hard to keep things with you over so many years, but that's one that's I still love to this day as a beautiful, beautiful setup. And it was a great script. Now, as you said, it was the script that got you the first job. And I know that you've told the story a million times. I'm going to ask you to tell it again because you were so thoughtful and strategic. I will, if you don't mind, I'll start the story with Moises coming in to our regular meetings back at Akasha Cafe in the days that we could do it and saying, "Hey, Lee, I signed up for this fellowship prep class." And I was like, "What are you doing? You know what you like, what?" And you went on to say like, no, there was a really good reason. So if you can take it from there and tell us all about the strategy that ultimately led to you getting staff. I love that story.
Thank you. And this is maybe trying to be sensitive in how I was learning how the networking happens. How do I move from being an emerging writer to getting a meeting, a coffee with someone that could essentially change your life, right? And what I've noticed is, a lot of writers, TV writers at any level that are working professionals, including executives, there are busy people. They're incredibly busy people. And now I know what they mean. But for me, I'm very sensitive about that. I'm very sensitive about asking people for favors, asking people to do something for me. If I either can't return, I would have to return the favor or figure out a way to maybe accomplish the same thing without actually just plain asking them for coffee. And the reason why I actually took a class with David Perez at the time, who was a writer on American Crime, is that I had seen David Perez at a panel and those panels that talk about diversity and how you break in, and it was just really I really liked his story and how he went through the fellowship program, and after the fourth try, I believe, like he finally got in and gave him the opportunity to write for American Crime. And I thought, oh, that's really great. I could learn a couple of things from him beside what he's just saying here. But, there was a line of people trying to talk to him, all asking, hey, can I pick your brain and go to take you to coffee? And that's the sort of the easiest way to begin a relationship with someone. And it's kind of like the go-to. But for me, I felt that was actually a lot to ask. And instead, I said, well, this town is built on relationships. I always felt like, if I work really hard on my craft, that's one thing, but people have to care about you. People have to care about your story, your background. It's part of the interviewing process for TV. I was learning that. I was learning that networking was important. And so when I heard that Davey was teaching a class, because I did meet him and I did ask for his info, and he gave me his Facebook sort of like info. He's like, we can be Facebook friends. And I'm like, I'll take it. But then when he announced that he was going to, teach a class for a fellowship, and this is like my second year or third already, like applying for the fellowships. So it's like I kind of had gotten already my hang with it, but I felt that it was an opportunity for him to get to know me and to get to know my writing and get to know my process and get to know how I sort of perform in groups and pitch and how do I get along with other people. Because I think that one of the most valuable lessons that I learned early on was those classes that you're taking, those people will eventually will become screenwriters and showrunners. Those classes that you're taking, you are being judged on how you give notes, how polite you are, how really compassionate are with your other fellow writers. It's like you're being judged. It's almost like every time I remember like feeling that every time I was going to class, of course being myself, but also reminding me that it's always a professional sort of setting, within its boundaries, and that I don't want to leave a bad impression on someone that down the road is going to be like, oh yeah, I was with that kid in class and he was awful. Because there's a couple of people that I still think about that left really bad impressions from class that they're working writers now, but I would never hire them for that reason. And I think that's terrible for me to say, but I think it just shows how first or second, third impressions like do give, they do last, and we're humans and we just can't help ourselves, and for that reason, I took a class with Davey, and Davey got to know me, got to know my writing. He really liked it. He was really impressed. And I only say that because his actions, spoke louder than his words, because he liked Second Coming a lot, so much. And the way that I was preparing my application, that he sent all those materials to executives at ABC without really telling me who. And then later I found out, a few days later, that it was the EPs from American Crime, Michael McDonald, and his director, Tommy Benjamin, that reached out for an interview. They really liked the material. They really liked the recommendation. And they thought that I would be a great candidate for the staff writing position. And so that's where that sort of process began. And the strategizing, even though it sounds like, I have a plan, it's more just, I think the idea behind it was expose and put yourself out there with people and be ready, right? Be always ready. Have your portfolio, have your demeanor, have your professionalism. Speak about your story. Speak about, sometimes you have to speak about your trauma and how that sort of relates to the way you write, or what stories you choose to write. And so all that is to say that I've always felt that it starts with the writing, and then everything sort of shows up after that. And it kind of has happened with for me when it comes to getting the job, getting reps. Like I never really actively was, really got in the idea of just seeking reps. It's like, no, I was actually more concerned of writing the next pilot, working on that, learning, taking the next class, surrounding myself in events where I can talk about my writing and talk about, follow up with people. And, that's part of sort of putting yourself out there in the most honest way. But at the same time, being aware that you have to be ready in case somebody's like, hey, love what you just said at that mixer. Can I read your pilot? Because that is like music to any, emerging writer's ears, is to hear someone with a little bit of power or with a lot of power that they want to read your pilot, not the other way around. I never really asked anybody to read my pilot unless it was coverage and I was paying for it. But I always want to be in that position where you present yourself in a way that when somebody says that, you're like, oh yeah, what's your email? I'll send it to you tonight. And let me know, looking forward to your thoughts. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. And I think that's the best possible scenario that could ever happen for an emerging writer.
Absolutely. And I mean, when I remember in that conversation when we talked about, wait, you signed up for this class, even though you know exactly how to do this. You said, I don't want to ask him for a read. As part of the class, he has to read me. I don't want to ask for that favor, but he reads me. And I have a feeling there that he'll connect to my work. And you were rightfully very confident in a great writing sample to say, I just want to put it in front of him and see what happens. So it definitely paid off. And then, ultimately you got into that writer's room, which was amazing. What is it like being in the writer's room for the first time? I mean, granted, it was kind of a dream writer's room, but if you could talk us through it a little bit, and then we can also talk about Star a little bit if you want.
Yeah, I mean, it was a dream writer's room because what the advantage of being a third season was that kind of the executive producer, John Riley, everybody was already, this is the third time around, so kind of already willing to go into it. It's not like we were trying to figure out what the show was. And John Riley was very efficient when it came to his creativity, and he already had a vision. And he ran the room very generously, actually, and also very efficiently, again, because I think the longest day we ever had was 4 hours, which is like unheard of, right? And usually you're like 8, 10, sometimes 12, depending on the needs. But he knew what the story was, and it was about human trafficking, essentially. So there was a lot of material that we had to read. There was a lot of material we had to consume. And so when we came to the room, we were all kind of already prepared with a lot of the pitches, because we had a general outline of how he wanted the season, some of the milestones that we needed to hit within the season. And so we sort of, worked towards that. And he just basically, he went around the room and we all like pitched and we had conversations around that pitch. And then we moved on. And if he liked something, we just would write it down, and we rarely visited it again. It was one of those things where if there's a good pitch and it fits and he was happy, and clearly he already was like envisioning the show in his head, he was very efficient about, okay, let's put that down and move on. And we moved on. And like we were done with breaking the 8 episodes in 6 weeks with that like 4 hour a day type of structure. He's like, I love my family. I have kids in school. I want to go pick them up at 3. And we're like, right on. And I think that actually inspired me to, one, be seen. And me as a staff writer, like, you're always nervous that like, are you contributing? Am I valuable? Are my pitches making sense? And he felt us very seen, and a lot of those pitches ended up on the screen. And furthermore, when I was able to get my first writing assignment with Janine Salinas as a co-writer, we both were the staff writers. And coincidentally, Janine was like an ABC fellowship program winner that was placed in that show. So for me, it was just so wonderful to see somebody so confident about storytelling and about the vision, and very efficient with his decision making. And of course, I'm sure it's like, his talent, but also the many years of experience. Winning an Oscar, helps. And so I always felt like, okay, it can be done, making that kind of decisions in 4 hours in a very efficient way, it can be done. And just trust that, right? That the first few ideas, there's something there, because we have a lot of talented, smart people that are contributing and the first few ideas are worth looking at it because they already come well thought out. And the fact that we had to be prepared and show up prepared because we only had 4 hours, we didn't have a whole day to sort of quote unquote linger and waste around and sort of come up with it. I think it made that process really wonderful. And then we were sent to outline. It was short outline. I think it was 8 pages. And then immediately after we were sent to script. And I think that we had maybe 2 drafts of that script. And then he had his pass, and that's what we ended up with on the screen. And Regina King was performing that scene, and so it was definitely a dream come true. But And other shows require a different sort of process, because I think this one in particular was very like broody and relationship and just a little bit more, had a very specific tone to it. And then, Star was a different kind of beast. And I learned a lot of different things in that show. American Crime got canceled, and or at least, I think like there was always a goal that the third season was going to be his last, because he was moving on to new things. So I didn't come back, but because I got essentially that job on my own, it was, my manager at the time, like, he thought it was a great opportunity to start speaking to some agencies. And that's when the 4 major agencies wanted to sign me as a result of me taking that slot. And I ended up signing with CAA. And with CAA's help, I was put in, in front of the EPs and showrunner and co-creator Lee Daniels for Star. And that same script and that interview process got me that job.
So how is that room different? Obviously, having kind of been through it with you, I'm aware in broad strokes of those differences, but I think writers often who haven't broken in yet, emerging writers, have the ability to think a room is a room is a room. And we know that's not the case. So can you talk a little bit about the differences, how the Star room ran, the difference between working a 4-hour day and an 8-10-hour day, and the lessons that you've learned there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this one's a little more intense because there were more episodes that eventually we needed to sort of, churn out. The pace felt, for some reason, faster. And we had Star was really an ensemble cast. And it had a lot of soapy elements. And so we had to really come up with a lot of storylines and serve a lot of character stories. I remember that, like, okay, this makes sense because when you have like 10 characters that you have to service, it takes a village, and it takes a lot of boards, basically, and not just that, but I believe that it was like in the middle of the room or maybe towards the end of the first batch of 8 characters mid-season where we got even a larger order. We went from 13 to 18 or something like that. So we ended up with an 18 episode season by the time I was done with that room. So the way that it was done is there was definitely a lot of churning out, like a lot of storylines, a lot of pitching. You had to come prepared as well. But things would shift because sometimes the episodes that were getting produced, things would scenes would get pushed out, things would get cut out, that would create a ripple effect in the later episodes. So you always had to come back and sort of adjust. And I think that allowed me to develop the skill set of coming up with a lot of story, coming up with solutions. And what I really appreciated about that time was that our showrunner, Karen Gist, also put us into situations where sometimes we would have to go and cover somebody else's set, because our upper levels were busy doing something else. So I actually I got to cover a couple more episodes that weren't even my episodes. So that I really was really grateful for that experience. That was in Atlanta. We also had to do a lot of rewrites, of episodes. The room sometimes had to, break an episode, but then she would pull out a few of us to rewrite some scenes that we're about to shoot. So I got to do that. I got to do a lot of rewrites, and that was exciting because it's just you're trying to build this whole huge thing, and sometimes you feel like you're really not that significant when it comes to the contribution of the big beast, But when you are giving this task, they're very welcome, and you feel like you're definitely contributing. It was tough because that year for me, I lost my grandfather, and that really took an emotional toll that like ended up sort of showing up later in my in sort of in the room. It's interesting sometimes how grief just sort of like messes you up in the minute, like coming back from set and just kind of crying for no reason. I'm like, is it the stress or the fact that I lost a loved one? So all of that, life sometimes gets in the way, but that was an incredible experience. And after that, I mean, it taught me that how resilient you can be. And if you have 18 episodes ahead of you, bring it on. And I think it would both experience really set the stage for me for Selena, because it was kind of like a combination of both.
So let's talk about Selena, because ultimately a lot of writers who are still staff writer, story editor, would love to move into creator and co-showrunner of a big Netflix show with a 20 episode order. But we know that usually the journey is more fraught and usually requires a few more years of working in a room, right, and earning your stripes. And yet you were able to make this magnificent, well-deserved leap. So talk to us a little bit about the process of Selena, how it came into your life, how it came to be, and the experience of show running your first show.
Yeah, and with Selena, I think I always kind of tell this story because you never know what project leads to what project. It sort of all compounds. I had acquired the rights to the World's Youngest Psychologist, which is this Mexican 13-year-old girl, and I thought, oh, this is a great Mexican Dewey Hauser type of story, right? And so and the reason why I was looking for rights or IP or anything is because if as soon as you start getting a little bit more versed in how this town works, IP is a huge thing, right? Or life rights or something that like you can sort of base, especially emerging writers. It's going to take a while for someone to really come in and love your original crazy idea in space, and so I was really conscious about making myself valuable as a creator and putting your producer hat, because if you do want to become a showrunner, you kind of have to be a producer. You have to act beyond just like writing a great, fantastic script. You have to wear a lot of hats, and those skill sets. I have to credit my advertising years for developing those skills. I was I was associate creative director. And so when I had that title in advertising, I was managing a team. I was pitching to clients. I was getting notes for ideas and those concepts. So it's like I had developed a skill set that essentially translated into running Selena in the room, because it's actually a huge management job. You're dealing with a group of people and you have to manage them and almost in a corporate setting, and so I knew that if I wanted to stand out, that I had to come with projects, almost doing the work as a producer, getting those rights, and going through the legal work to get those rights, and then so coming to my agents and reps with like, I have this project, and they were setting me up with meetings, to sort of soft pitch, right? Just like with producers and buyers actually. And I think they were getting, I'm assuming, really good feedback, and they're as a result of that. And this set me up with Campanario, the production company that had the rights, to develop a TV series based on Selena and Selena's family career and journey. And so, well, here it is. We think you would be great. And they set it up a week from when they called me, and I was really, really excited because as a Latino growing up with Selena and knowing what she represented to me, she's like Mexican American royalty. I was actually a little surprised that this was not like a hot project that everybody wanted to like sign on to. I was just like, why are we not? Why isn't it The Crown? Why are people jumping into that? And maybe there was that sort of interest, but I think that what I came in when I met the producers is I was able to convince them of the importance of how epic this story was and how it at least warranted more than 4 to 5 episodes, because I think that's what they had in mind, a limited series of 4 to 5 episodes, 6 at most. And I came in and I had done so much work beside and beyond with what I, already knew of her, to pitch and to make the case that if I were to take on this job, I would at least, produce, create, write 20 episodes. There's enough story for 20 episodes. The early days, the falling in love, and then the superstardom, right? And so after speaking, making that general, which usually doesn't happen, and I don't recommend it, but for some reason we got caught into one, like my story and how like I had a lot of perils with Selena, and then also Selena's story, and also what I envisioned for the show. It essentially was a 2.5 hour meeting. And after that, everyone was so excited. The producers were excited. They called my agents, and they were the next day, and they essentially offered me to get attached to the project as the writer. And soon after that, I started building the pitch deck, putting into words what I had essentially envisioned. And I turned that in. They gave me very little notes. I turned it around, and that pitch deck, which turned out to be, I think, like really beautiful. And it really spoke about what I wanted to do in this aspirational. It really led to convincing the family's lawyer, and then flying to pitch to the family, Abraham, Suzette Quintanilla, and just like, this is what I want to do. And they were right on board with that. And I think with all those elements are coming together, and that package is like, everyone was excited, including Netflix. Because like if the family was saying like, yeah, we want this vision, we approve of this vision, we'll make this show, it's really hard to any network that is really interested in doing to be like, no, we think you're wrong. It's like, no, yeah, you're right. So if anything, I think having the family on board beforehand was instrumental about being able to demand that I be an EP, that I be the creator, that I, at least be the co-showrunner. And that was part of my deal. And because I had proved to Netflix that I was able to envision what the Selena story should be, but also because I had the support of the family, I supported the producers, and at that point CA was fully on board as well, because it was going to be a package for them. And so that's how I was able to sort of convince Netflix, and they accepted and they bought it. And, my deal was, closed in that form. But I do have to say that in order for me to really earn the responsibility of like managing a writer's room and leading that and creating that, I had to come to terms being very honest about my strengths and weaknesses, in a professional sort of like, way of saying, this is what I can do. I have this experience and I can absolutely have the skills to do that. However, I understand that I don't have a lot of years of experience. I'm coming from staff writer to co-showrunner, really, EP, creator. So let me get the tools and surround myself with people in order to set myself up for success and set up Selena for success. And that's when I reached out to the WGA for the showrunner training program. I had missed the deadline, but they were really kind enough to take an interview. That's when I brought somebody from American Crime as a co-showrunner to help me fill in those blanks in the production process. And that's why I hired people that were upper levels, that were comfortable with my deficiencies, but at the same time also can bring and provide all that experience that I was lacking. Because we had to develop the scripts, and then the turnaround was pretty fast. So I just wanted to make sure that was set up for success, and everyone was supportive of that. And did it go smoothly? Of course not. What show does? And if they're telling them that it is, it's a lie, But ultimately, we stuck to the vision, to the structure, to what we were trying to achieve, and it paid off. And this is the result of it.
So one of my favorite Moises stories that I tell all the time, because I think it's just so meaningful and speaks to who you are, is you and I met obviously a number of times between the time the show went and the time that the room got started. And at some point you said to me, I really want to hire writers that have the right experience for this. I'm going to be looking for Mexican American female writers, potentially from Texas. Do you know anybody? And I remember giving you a name and you were jotting it down and a list of many, many, many other things. And fast forward a couple of months later, you're putting together the room and you called me, and it was your first days in the room, literally. And I'm not saying that in jest. It was literally, I think, like day 2 or day 3. You called me and you said, what was the name of that writer that you mentioned? Because I told you that she was Mexican American from Texas, yada, yada, super talented writer, but had not been staffed yet. I said, what was her name? And I gave you her name, and you guys connected very quickly, and you met and you offered her the job. It was really, really quick. And it was really moving for me. Why did you decide to do that?
Because I think by being a staff writer and being so close to actually that feeling and that state of any writer's life, I understood what that writer was capable of, which was not a disappointment at all by any means, because and this is Pamela Garcia Rooney, but she was coming off of Writers on the Verge, if I'm not mistaken. And anybody that comes out of those fellowships, they are gruesome. It's boot camp. And so that kind of was very reassuring for me. And it was very, very important, one, to have, Mexican-American voices from Texas. It's a little different from Mexican-American voices from California or Chicago, so that sort of that kind of culture, that Tex-Mex culture. But also because, as a cisgender male, as much as I believe I'm a rainbow and I can, wear all the glitter in the world, it's just, I really wanted to make sure that, the Latina, the Mexican-American women's voice was really present, right? Because this is about Selena primarily, and then the family secondarily. And so for me, Pamela was a no-brainer. And I didn't have to really mull over that decision because I believed in her potential. I read her work and it was just like, let's do it. I'm not going to really think about it. And I know she's going to be great. And she was. I think also my strategy was part of proving to the network and the producers that I could put together a room, and that I was doing the work to put together a room, and that it made sense, because I was prepared to defend, tooth and nail, each writer. And so before that happened, I kind of did all the work behind the scenes. That's why I was calling Lee, and I was trying to just hear from recommendations for people that I trusted. And that's how, Pamela became that sort of writer that had never been staffed. And I was really, really proud of that, because by being prepared, and by the time we were starting to discuss writers, I already had spoken to all the ones that I was gonna hire. It's well, I already spoke to this person and this person. I already interviewed this person. Here is their bios. I already read their scripts. So I was kind of already giving them, here's the list. Here's the team. And, to give Campanario and Netflix all the credit, they were really supportive and right on. I think we had maybe a couple of writers, because out of scheduling reasons or something, we had to sort of go through another process, like agents and managers, and get that involved. But I had 80% of the room already sort of set up and really go, and Pamela was part of that. And so I think if a showrunner knows what they want and know the kind of people they want, it's a really easy decision to make, and one of the things that I did, which I think that a lot of people don't do when it comes to Latinx writers or people of color, is I really bet on them, on their potential, because that's how I got the gig I got. That's how I got my first job. People bet on me on my potential, not my experience. There are, certain experience kind of mattered. Of course, it mattered that I was a published author. It matters that I had this other experience that was relevant into, making television. But so I was based on that, on that potential. And that's how I based my decision to hire Pamela and the other writers as well.
I love it. And listen, back then I remember us talking about it because Pamela, who's also a good friend and a client, called super excited. And I said to you, like, this is your first week. What are you doing? This is amazing. And you said, yeah, somebody gave me that first break, and I want to make sure that one of the first things that I do is give it to somebody else who's deserving. And I think it really spoke to who you are. Now, with season 2 of Selena coming out on Netflix in June, right? It's right around the corner.
May 4th, actually.
May 4th. Oh my God, it's coming up.
Soon. Yeah, they I think it was May 14th, and then they just sort of pushed it back to May 4th. So it's coming sooner than we think.
Can't wait to check it out. But now that one's behind you, you launched your production company. Tell us a little bit about what's next and how you pave your path from here.
Well, after that experience and making sort of that big leap from staff writer to co-showrunner creator, I learned so much. It's almost like trial by fire, boot camp. It's like, I wanted to really make use of those skills and also the lessons learned. Like, my other writers that I hired were Latinx because it was important for the storytelling, and within that diversity, within that Latinx monolith, there's a lot of diversity. And so I was really proud to be able to cultivate those sort of relationships with those writers and getting to know them and realizing there's like so many more stories to tell, from the Latin American, Indigenous, Afro-Latinx point of view, and all the genres, right? So for me, that was really vital, and it spoke to my sort of personal mission. Because a lot of my work, even though sometimes it might be sci-fi or a little delving into a genre, it's still based on it's still identity based, intersectionality, and it's sort of like how you have to live in multiple worlds and family relationships, and how like the validation from parents affects us in a different way, and I wanted to explore that, and I knew when I was going to be done with Selena, that there was going to be a period where we all were going to be waiting for Selena to come out, and it was going to be the first time that I was going to, come out to the world and do my rounds and talk to people as a co-showrunner and leading the room. But I wanted to leverage that win because there are not that many of us that end up with that sort of privilege of being a showrunner or leading a team. And so it's like, well, what's next, right? Like, how can we take control of our storytelling, and what does it take, right? And I've always, since the beginning, and that's how I had my first job, and how I got the second job and so forth. I've always been very entrepreneurial. Like, I always had that producer hat. I didn't think of like the natural sequence to do was to like, okay, be the showrunner on the next show, talk to my agents about what's the next thing we're gonna do. I wasn't even thinking about that. I was like, no, I think we need to build a production company in order to use the probably window that I'm going to have all eyes on me because Selena's out and the second season is going to be out soon, to really make the case that that we can create more stories, and not just the ones that I can do, and shepherd more writers. And one of the things that a lot of people have really commented and said like, oh, it's amazing, what does it feel like to achieve this dream? And I'm like, you know what, it is a dream. I felt like I achieved this dream and like accomplished this dream like when I published my novel, and this is just like huge thing and in its own right, and it's a little different. So it's like, what happens then? It's like, well, you share the dream, you pass it on, you create more paths and opportunities for other people to be there. Because, one of the things that, I've also discovered in my journey here is that we all have unique point of views. Like, nobody's really competing. Sometimes it feels like we're competing with each other because there are not that many Latinx stories out there by Latinx creators. But I think that if I can, be responsible for at least a couple of more, or help a couple more creators get there, then that's a really fantastic place to be. Because I think at the end, I don't think I'm going to be a showrunner forever. I think at some point I'm going to be like, hey, I just want to write poetry. But right now, I felt like from showrunner to producer, and to be able to at least not just have one show, but multiple shows under that umbrella, felt like another huge leap, but I'm used to big leaps. So let's do it. Let's bring it on. And so I met an executive, Bianca Quesada, who I really just had a great energy synergy as far as values, determination, vision. And so we we were working on a project together, and I really loved the way that we managed that, we developed that, and that I'm like, it just felt good to take that leap and provide that space to empower her as a Latina executive, but also to empower me and shepherd other projects other than my own projects, and feel like, okay, this is my happy place. Like, I'm creating shows and then we're producing them, and holy crap, and mind you, COVID happened. So we felt that, like, oh crap, what are we getting ourselves into? We don't know when this is going to end, but it did allow us to actually double down on the effort. And we worked on the infrastructure, on networking. And as a result, we sold 2 shows. They're currently in development, 2 TV shows, 10 months after we started our production company. Just sort of a testament that, like, the need is out there, the want is out there, and then we can do it, right? We can build those opportunities. Of course, there's still more work to do. We still have to prove ourselves in many other ways. But again, I'm used to the leaps. I'm used to the challenges. I surround myself with, lots of people that I trust. This is not a just me thing. It's like we all doing it, and that's exciting. That's exciting when you're bringing everyone on board, and you're part of a bigger thing, than you're just your own self. That's exciting, and I love being part of that change, because, just how the Pamela story is still one of, it really resonates, especially Lee, because you witnessed that. Like, I want a lot more of those, and if I'm capable of being able to do that and still be happy and not be miserable because I'm creating like wonderful things, then all good, let's do it. And I think the climate, the industry needs it, and happy to provide that service.
I love that. Well, just to clarify, so that people know what we're talking about, you have shows that are set up with HBO Max and ABC signatures. So nothing to sneeze at. This is a pretty big deal. Now, you've given us a ton of time and a ton of insights and, kind of view into your journey. Last advice that you have for emerging writers that are trying to get to where you are, that are trying to get that first break, that are trying to be seen in that way?
Well, I said it throughout this conversation, but growth mindset, really just put yourself out there in a place where you can learn. And, I don't think writing is at any form wasted. So if a pilot doesn't give you the results that you wanted, doesn't matter. Like, that actually, it just starts developing a layer of talent on top of another layer of talent. And without that pilot, maybe it doesn't lead to another project. So keep your mind open to always growing. Don't let your ego in the way. And, that allows you not only to work on your craft, but also on your professionalism. And I think it's really essential to have that growth mindset to really succeed and to actually make those leaps the same way that, I was lucky enough to make.
That is great. And I mean, listen, having known you 7 or 8 years that we've been in one another's lives, you practice what you preach. So I do think that what happened to you and where you are right now, it's not an accident. And I think it's incredibly important that we remember that there's a lot of hard work and there's some good fortune that went into it, right? Some good luck that plays into it. But, preparation negates the need for luck. And you've worked really hard for every opportunity and nothing was given to you. I always remember the story, and just give me a moment to brag because I can. When you went in to interview for American Crime, you had to take a lot of different meetings, and including a meeting with Disney's diversity program that would possibly be picking up part of your pay. And I remember that you telling me that Janine Jones-Clark, who is now over at Universal, who's a great executive in charge of these programs, asked you in the meeting, if there is one episode in the last season or in our 2 seasons where you could change something, what episode was it and what would it be? And you had an answer. like you were completely prepared. And I think that's where that thoughtful preparation goes a really long way, and where, yes, some really good things happen, and there's luck always helps, but the work has to be there. So, and I do think you're a testament to that. And so I wanted to thank you for your time today doing this with me. I'm so fortunate to get to work with you, people like you, and getting to amplify you as an absolute treat. Thank you for sharing and for continuing to foster everything that you do with your writers. People don't know this, but the writers that worked with you during COVID, when everybody was freaking out, you were doing your little cafecito in the mornings. He was getting together all his writers on Zoom from all of his rooms and doing writing sessions. So you've always put your money where your mouth is, and I really appreciate it. So with that in mind, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for doing this. Everybody should watch Selena on May 4th. Binge that first season if you haven't already, and jump straight into the second. It's going to be amazing, and I can't wait for everybody to see all that you do from here on out.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate for your time and your friendship and your advice, and let's do it.
Thanks again to Moises Zamora and guest host Lee Jessup for a great chat. Selena, the series, is streaming on Netflix right now. And as always, thanks to you, our listeners. If you liked this episode, leave us a review, and if you haven't already, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. For news about future episodes and more, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Final Draft Inc. and Instagram at Final Draft Screenwriting. This episode was produced by Kayla Guess with help from associate producer Emma Vranich. Music by T. Kelly. Thanks again, everyone. Until next time, write on.